Oh, wow. That's it there. Thanks.
This house, situated in the small Scottish fishing village of Pittenweem, was originally David's parents' home and his grandparents before them.
Oh, wow.
As the sole asset in this estate, it's a relief to see the house is still in one piece.
Yep, still water running.
If not in need of some TLC.
So much dust.
This is the only known photograph of David Brown, taken at a business conference. David passed away on the 20th of February 2014. Although little is known about his life, David never married, and in his final years, he became something of a recluse.
He kept very much himself to himself. He was a smiley man. He always had a nice smile.
Neighbour Sarah McLeod's family has owned the house next door to David's for over 100 years. But he spent much of his time working away.
That he was a sort of travelling salesman. He had worked in England most of the time when I was growing up. So I got to know him when he was a retired man.
Sarah was with David during his final days.
Popped in to see him, and he was in bed, bedridden, couldn't speak. But we did make eye contact and touched his hand and stuff. And that was the last time I saw him, and I think he died the next day. I felt sad because the nurses told me that nobody had been in to see him.
It's believed David didn't leave a will. Mike has a box of John's treasured items from his home, full of clues about their lives.
So I found a bag with a box with F.W.G. Wilson on it, which is obviously John's dad. It's got quite a lot of medals and a couple of ribbons, so it looks like he probably served in World War I and World War II.
In fact, John's father Frank played a vital role protecting Britain's shores when he served with the Royal Observer Corps during World War II.
So here I am at Dover Castle. I'm on the roof of the Fire Command Post, which was used in the Second World War as one of the observation areas. Frank and his team would be using areas a little bit like this, of course, during the war. And this part of Dover was all known, of course, as Hellfire Corner. Many, many shells fell on the old town of Dover. The town had the highest civilian casualties in Kent.
The Observer Corps had been in existence since 1925, and its role was to spot any incoming attacks from air or sea. And for men like Frank, it was dangerous work.
They had hats, helmets. They were just monitoring. They had no form of defense themselves.
Frank would have been stationed somewhere on the Kent coast, a hotspot for the Nazi planes.
In 1940, with the Battle of Britain, he'd be watching wave after wave of German planes coming over from the horizon across to England. And his work, his activity, was absolutely essential to be able to scramble our own fighters to be able to take offensive action against those German planes coming right across the channel there. Frank himself, his role was absolutely vital. All the work that the Royal Observer Corps did during the Battle of Britain was well respected. So much so that, in fact, it was actually in 1941, after the Battle of Britain, that George VI awarded them their royal status. They became the Royal Observer Corps because of their activity during the Battle of Britain.
The noise would have been developing as he arrived towards the bowl of the stadium. He'd have emerged into the light here, and the whole crowd and the whole pitch would have unfolded before him.
Frank may not have married or had any children, but on the terraces of his beloved club, he had another kind of family.
I'm sure that coming here every week, Frank would have had the sense of a sense of camaraderie, a sense of belonging. You're in a crowd of 32,000, and certainly when you do enter the ground and you feel the buzz and you get the atmosphere and you hear the noise and you see the colour and you talk to people around you and you anticipate the game, you know, it is a wonderful feeling.
As a lifelong supporter, Frank saw his club through thick and thin.
When he first started coming down here in 1970, they'd just been FA Cup finalists. During the 1970s, they had a really entertaining side with 4 England internationals playing for them. During the 1980s, he would have seen players like Gary Lineker and Alan Smith, who both went on to score a lot of goals, not only for Leicester City, but for England. And then in the 1990s, he would have seen Leicester City get to Wembley on 7 occasions in 9 years.
On stage at the Ken Collier Club, Rosina's performances were a hit with the crowd.
The audience is crammed into a very small space in front of me, and the band would have been trying to project over that audience, which is not very much lower than their own head height. Imagine Rosina coming onto the stage with the front line arrayed around her. If she sings at her natural height, she's going to be singing straight into the midriffs of the crowd in front of her. So she'd be up, she'd be on a chair or a packing case, she'd be singing out across the crowd. The most incredible thing about the recordings that she made here is the fact that you hear her acoustically. She'd be using her lungs, projecting the voice, and what you hear is not what you might imagine the voice of a 3-foot-tall person would sound like. You hear a big, developed voice.
But sadly, Rosina's rise to singing fame was suddenly curtailed.
Both the 51 closed, which meant that there wasn't anywhere for the people who were regulars there to continue meeting, and the music that was being played there fell away.
His paternal grandfather, David Brown, was a fisherman in the town of Cellardike. And from there, when we did all of the research into that part of the family, the Browns were almost entirely involved in the fishing industry.
Pittenweem Harbour, where the deceased David grew up, is still one of the most active fishing ports on the east coast of Fife in Scotland. It was first recorded as a fishing port in 1228, but it wasn't until the latter part of the 19th century that the fishing industry hit its peak, as the world's appetite for Scottish herring was at an all-time high.
Well, this boat would have been seasonally involved in the herring fishing. She would have had a crew of 8 men and a boy on board at that time.
David Brown's grandfather would have worked on a similar boat to this one, which is over 100 years old.
So it's a year-round industry, particularly for people in this kind of community. Undoubtedly a tough life, and a hard life, and a dangerous one.
But in the early 20th century, the herring industry was in decline. So many local men forged more stable careers outside of the traditional family trade, including David Brown's father, who became an engineer.
If you had a son, you would be wanting your son to have a better life, and we wouldn't want him to be involved with the fishing.
The younger David Brown distanced himself even further from the family trade, opting for a career in sales.
I don't think there'd have been any difficulty about, disloyalty to the industry, as it were, by opting out.
In the late 19th and early 20th century, hats were at the peak of their popularity in England, with hat manufacturing one of the busiest industries of the era.
Everyone wore a hat, man, woman and child. You wouldn't leave the house without a hat.
But not just any old hat would do. Your choice of headwear was governed by stringent rules.
The hat etiquette at this time was very strict. What kind of hat you wore depended on your status and your role in society. The foreman of a factory would wear one kind of hat, whereas the workers would wear another.
Men like Edith's grandfather, Benjamin Cook, who made hats for a living, were referred to as hatters.
Benjamin Cook would have mainly been making silk top hats, but it was all done by hand in the time we're just thinking about. So you'd have to spend many years training to get it exactly right. It was quite a lonely job because you'd be in a room all by yourself.
It may have been hard work for very little pay, but hatters did get some perks. Bosses would insist on their staff drinking a large quantity of beer each day, and for good reason.
Then the urine at the end of the day would be put into a bucket, and then the urea from that would be used for the felting process with wool. All the hatters would live along the road, and at the end of the night or in the morning, you'd leave your bucket of urine outside and you get a penny for your bucket, hence why there are so many penny lanes around the country.
However, there was one major drawback to this fascinating profession.
Being a hatter was not a healthy occupation. You were surrounded by toxic chemicals, with the main toxicity being mercury. Mercury poisoning gives you the shakes, it makes you hallucinate, and it makes you appear insane.
This is where the phrase mad as a hatter originated from.
And it eventually will kill you. Not a very nice disease.
Mason was also likely to have witnessed an amazing period in the company and the UK's history. Although the vast majority of employees at Ford were men, 167 women had a vital role sewing the upholstered seats for every car the factory made.
That was the first car I worked on when I joined Ford's. These are beautifully made.
It is lovely. It takes back to memories of what we've done.
During the 1960s, Gwen Davis and Eileen Pullen were sewing machinists who worked alongside Mason Walley in the Dagenham factory.
It was hard work at first, but you got into it. We used to have to make 19 seats an hour. And you had to put your number on the seat, because in case there were faults, then a seat would come back to you. You couldn't get away with doing bad work.
But despite doing a technically demanding job, the women were not rewarded for their expertise.
Many of them had hailed from skilled jobs in the rag trade in the East End of London. They knew that they were skilled. In this factory, they were paid at the very bottom of the pay hierarchy.
Resentment grew when the female sewing machinists saw that less skilled male colleagues got paid the same as them.
The janitors, who were graded the same as us, sweeping up, they couldn't do the work we were doing. They could never come off at what they were doing and go on to another job because they didn't have to do it. All they knew was sweeping.
So in 1968, the women, led by Gwen and Eileen, decided the only way Ford would listen to them was if they took direct action.
The moment we laid down our tools and said no more...
And then they didn't have no more seats.
No,
that's why
it only lasted, what was it, a week and a half?
That's right.
And they ran out of seats. So it showed our job was important.
Yeah, but you can't run a car without a seat, can you?
No, no.
With competition from rival firms, it was tough staying ahead, even with all hands on deck.
When you've got so many people to find, you don't know if the competition is ahead of you, behind you. Not easy.
The Williams side was looking especially difficult, as Dave had discovered Kate's father worked as a waterman and was likely to have moved around.
So you could have brothers and sisters, and I've had it in the past, 8 or 9 children, literally all born in different parts of the country, but if you put them all on together as a map, it's the map of the waterways.
But a check of the 1911 census offered a glimmer of hope.
The father, from an early age, became a lockkeeper and therefore obviously was in one place and remained there, so all the children would have been born probably from that one address.
We know that Francis Wood Williams became a lockkeeper in 1906. And by that time, he was in his late 50s, so he may have opted for a more gentle lifestyle.
Although it was still a very physical job.
Francis Wood Williams would have done a number of things throughout the day. He could have been running water, moving water from a higher level to a lower level if that lower level was getting a bit shallow. He would put the windlass on here and then turn it round. He would then come over here, put his hands on here, and then push open the lock gate, open those gates, and away they go off to market. It wouldn't have been a life of leisure for him, because pushing something weighing anything up to 2 tons, it's really quite hard work.
Karen has just one more piece of business at the house.
Hi, is it Eric?
How are you doing?
How are you doing? I'm Karen.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Great to see you. I'm really glad you could come down today.
You're welcome.
She's invited antique clock expert Eric Young round to value the 2 grandfather clocks that belonged to David.
This clock was made by George Lumsden from Pittenweem.
David's property is estimated to be worth £150,000, and the clocks could add value to his estate.
And I'm dying to ask you, how much do you think these clocks are worth?
Each clock would need to be given a value of £5,000.
£5,000?
Yeah, £5,000 without question.
Clock?
For each clock, they are
my
absolutely incredible examples of East Nuke clock making.
That is amazing. That really is amazing.
Anyway,
thanks so much, Eric. Take care. Bye.
The clocks are a welcome addition to the estate. For the team in the office, their research is finally complete. In total, they found an incredible 192 heirs.
The majority of the heirs are entitled to 123rd of this estate.
John started at East Kent, the bus company, virtually 16th birthday, just as a junior clerk to assist in the bus routes. He worked there then to the time he was eventually retired, which was after 50 years and 1 day of service, I think it was.
Martin and John's other friends, Richard and David from East Kent Buses, remember his love for the job.
You know, if we're talking about him, we ought to really get the old lady out. Look at that. Oh, yeah. The number 8, yeah? And 100 years of East Kent and 50 years of John working for East Kent as well.
Yeah.
For a great guy. John travelled on buses like this for most of his working life. There she goes. This would have taken him to work and back home every day. Yeah, she's still as good as new.
John was a bus scheduler in head office his entire life.
Come on.
And had a passion for travelling on the buses he timetabled.
David, sit down here.
John always used to sit downstairs at the front.
At the front,
because
yeah.
he could never make it upstairs at the end.
Right, in his older days. But in his younger days, he went up to have a cigarette anyway.
That's right.
After retirement, John and his friends had many happy hours travelling on vintage buses, something they still do in his honour.
It's a celebration of John's life and the friendship that we all had together, especially when I take the bus out, and if I go past up street, I look at Fred's house and I say, we're thinking of you, mate, thinking of you.